Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's great to have you here. I'm going to do a slightly different type of video today. It's going to be a little bit more personal. I'm going to take you through my fertility journey and talk you through some of the difficulties and hurdles that I had to go through to get pregnant. I'm currently 19 weeks pregnant with my first baby, and listen, I'm just here to share my story, to share my experience. I'm not a medical professional, so if you need advice, support and medical help, please reach out to the right people. I'm just here to share my story in the hope that it might be of help to anyone out there that might be going through something similar, or that might be curious about other people's experience with this very touchy, sensitive subject. You see a lot of women and a lot of men, a lot of couples go through fertility problems, and it's so much more common than we might think. And so just talking about it, putting our stories out there, I think is very powerful. There's something very, very valuable in doing so and just sharing our experiences. I'm very aware that I am been very lucky and very privileged to be able to go through things the way I did. You will hear about it in the story shortly. So I'm very aware that there might be people that might be having it much harder, and I'm here to empathize and try to deal with this subject in the most delicate way possible, because it really deserves toughness as much as possible. So having said that, let's jump right in. I will begin by sharing my experience. Here we go. As a teenager, I had very normal, regular periods. Nothing really out of the ordinary. I would just have a little bit of cramping, which is quite common, but nothing really to worry about. And I got my first checkup at the gynecologist in my teens, and I was told that I was prone to having little cysts on my ovaries. And cysts are essentially little sacs filled with fluid that forms on ovaries, and they're very, very common. A lot of people, a lot of women get them, and they typically just come and go without you even knowing, and they clear up by themselves without any sort of intervention. So what we did was we kept a watchful eye over them, and as time went by, we kept noticing that they weren't really clearing. So the gynecologist prescribed the contraceptive pill for me to start taking, as it's often found to work quite well to clear up cysts. So now fast forward to 2014, and that's when I got my diagnosis for endometriosis. What is endometriosis? Now, let me take the trusted NHS definition of it. It is a condition where tissue similar to the lining of the womb starts to grow in other places, such as the ovaries and fallopian tubes, and it can affect women of any age, and it's a long-term condition that can have significant impact on your life, but there are treatments that can help. So how did I find out that I had endometriosis? Well, I started experiencing very strong pelvic pains, and they will not just come about during my period, they would persist all of the time. And so I went to my gynecologist, got checked, and I was diagnosed with endometriosis. That kind of resulted and culminated into a big cyst forming on my left ovary. It was the size of a tennis ball, which is mind-blowing. And I had to get keyhole surgery to get it removed in October 2015. Prior to the surgery, I was told that if the cyst had damaged my ovary, they might have to remove the ovary altogether. However, they would try to do the best that they could to limit the damage to it as they were to remove the cyst. So I was very aware that this may or may not have had any impact on my future fertility. That was not great to hear, I have to tell you that. The surgery actually went well. They didn't have to remove my left ovary. Everything was in relatively good conditions. So after that, I was put on a protocol where I had to take a pill that completely stopped my period for about a year, and this was to give a rest to my system to help recovery. And then following that, I would have had to go back to the regular contraceptive pill, basically until I was ready to have kids. At that point, then I would have stopped and started trying for a baby. Now fast forward to July 2021. At that point, my husband and I are ready to start trying for a baby, and I had finished my last blister of pills and I was ready to give it a go, essentially. I started using Natural Cycles, which is an app that monitors your entire menstrual cycles and is able to predict when you're most fertile and less fertile, and it's a great tool to, first of all, learn more about your own period. And for me, it was a big rediscovery because by that point, I had not had a normal period, or regular period, shall we say, in a very long time, and I wasn't really in tune with my body. I didn't know what normal was for me. So learning about it or re-educating myself about it was actually massively helpful. So I kept monitoring my morning temperature every day as the app recommends, and I also in parallel took ovulation tests regularly to really keep an eye on where I was at in my cycle and when it would have been the best time to have intercourse. So I try to approach this in a very structured, methodical way. This is very much like me. You know, I felt like I was somewhat in control. But very quickly, I started to realize that my cycle was far from regular. I started having 40-day cycles followed by 90-day cycles, and it was a very confusing time and confusing process. And despite these irregularities, I really held on tight to the data that I had through the ovulation tests and the app, and really tried to time intercourse in line with those to really maximize my chances of getting pregnant. Now, fast forward to end of November 2021. At this point, we'd been trying for many months and we were obviously not seeing any results. My cycles were all over the shop. Clearly, my body had not yet readjusted to normal, and I wasn't really sure on what was happening. And because of my history with endometriosis, I suggested to my husband to go for a fertility assessment at a fertility clinic, because unfortunately we couldn't qualify for NHS assessments at that stage. And thankfully it just turned out that he had insurance coverage for those type of treatments, which is an incredible perk. And so we signed up at Care Fertility, which was one of the clinics that was covered by the insurance policy. And we decided to do a full assessment. I had an internal ultrasound scan and then a AMH blood test. I will tell you about that in a second. And Ruben had a semen assessment. So the internal scan is to assess that the uterus and the ovaries are in good health, that there are no fundamental issues, and it's just really to have a good look at what the situation looks like internally. Then the AMH test is, now let me check my notes, is to check the level of anti-Mullerian hormone, I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is used as an indicator of ovarian reserve. Circling back to the results. So from Ruben's point of view, the semen test came back all clear, no issues at all. As for me, the scan actually revealed that I have polycystic ovaries, which is something that I was suspecting obviously at this point, but they counted about 12 on the left side, which was the side that I had an operation on, and then 20 on the other side. Now, usually most women would have less than 10 on each. The larger amount of follicles actually causes irregular periods, and in conjunction with other symptoms such as acne and others, it might mean that I may have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which turned out to be my case. And this has an impact on fertility because the chances of conceiving are smaller. Ovulation is irregular and sometimes doesn't occur at all. So with that information, combined with the blood test results, which confirmed what the scan had identified, we were presented with the option to have a high Cosi scan, which I will read the definition to you now. What is a high Cosi scan? It's a short procedure that is used for investigating the cavity of the uterus and the fallopian tubes to ensure that an egg can travel down them with ease. If either the cavity is abnormal or the tubes are damaged or blocked, it might be difficult to become pregnant. Because of my history with endometriosis, where endometrial tissue may have formed and traveled where it shouldn't have been, my fallopian tubes may have been blocked, or there might have been some mechanical issues and obstacles that could have prevented me from getting pregnant naturally. So we've established that I have PCOS, we have established that my endometriosis may still play a role, so we decided to take this test to rule out any mechanical blockage, and so we did. It was a very simple procedure, not painful at all, and I was given the all clear right away. There was no blockage, no issue, which was such good news. I was very, very pleased to hear. So at this stage, we were clear that from Ruben's side, everything was good. From my side, we had to deal with these irregular cycles because of my PCOS. And thankfully, we were not dealing with any obstructions as a result of my endometriosis. So we were presented with a few options. One was to continue as we had been up until that point, so trying naturally without any sort of intervention. Two was to induce ovulation with the use of Clomid, which is a medication I will tell you more about in a second, and combine that with timed intercourse. Or three, just go all guns ablaze straight for IVF. Now, we decided to go for option two, which was to stimulate ovulation, essentially giving a little bit of a boost to my ovaries to be working as they should be and to be doing the job that they're meant to be doing. What Clomid does is just enhance what the natural follicular phase process normally is in a woman's cycle. Essentially, each follicle in an ovary, usually every month, would start growing and maturing and growing an egg inside of it. Now, by the end of the follicular phase, one of the many follicles would end up dominating over the others and releasing one egg at the time of ovulation, ready to be fertilized. With Clomid, there is a little bit of extra stimulation. And for someone like me, who has a lot of follicles, as you now know, this could have meant that more than one follicle could have become viable and would have been able to release an egg for fertilization. That would have meant a twin pregnancy. Sometimes, when stimulated with Clomid, more than two follicles might mature, which might lead to the risk of multiple pregnancies. So, as a rule of thumb, when taking Clomid, you would be monitored on a regular basis throughout that whole follicular phase to establish how many follicles are growing, how many are actually becoming viable, to make a good assessment of how many eggs are likely to be released during ovulation, ready to be fertilized. Because as a policy, when more than two follicles become viable, you would call off the cycle completely, not have any intercourse, to not risk having multiple pregnancies, which could be obviously a big risk to both mum and babies. So, what was the protocol? Well, let me tell you about it. I began taking 50 milligrams of COVID on...
COVID? My God.
I started taking 50 milligrams of Clomid on day 2 of my period for 5 days. Then at around day 8 or 10 from the beginning of my period, I started going into the clinic almost every other day to assess how many follicles were growing. We noticed that I had 2 competing follicles which continued to fight against one another throughout day 13 and then day 17. On day 17, I was told, okay, one of them is larger than the other. The bigger one was 17 millimeters. And bear in mind that ovulation happens when the dominant follicle is around 22 to 24 millimeters in diameter. Around that size, then you can comfortably predict that ovulation is close by. So in parallel with these scans, I had to continue taking ovulation tests just to make sure that I knew exactly when ovulation was due to occur and continue having intercourse up until that point. So they told me, you may have a chance that both of them might mature and end up releasing eggs. We cannot tell you with full certainty. So it's up to you whether you want to take that risk or whether you want to pull off this cycle and try for a better outcome the next. So Ruben and I decided to bite the bullet and just give it a go. So on day 19, I ended up actually ovulating, and we just made sure to have intercourse, not to miss that opportunity. And a couple of days later, I had to go back to the clinic to make sure and check that ovulation had actually occurred, which it had, which was such a happy moment. They could see the corpus luteum, which is a little cyst that forms post-ovulation that produces progesterone and that supports the newly fertilized egg. So I was given progesterone pessaries as a supplement for progesterone to make sure that newly fertilized egg could be as supported as possible. And then I was told to not take any pregnancy tests for a couple of weeks and just wait. Fast forward now to March 3rd, which was a couple of weeks later. I took a pregnancy test and oh boy, it was positive, which was unbelievable. So this is what happened. And I'm just very aware that this is a much simpler process than a lot of people experience. I've been on countless blogs, Reddit, you name it, and I've read so many articles, so many blog entries of women that have gone through much worse situations with much longer timelines, trying for years and having big trouble conceiving. So I'm very, very aware that my story is a lot more simple than others. But I also want to talk you through the struggle that I experienced emotionally, psychologically, mentally going through this, because it was very, very taxing on my mental health. I can tell you that at the beginning of this process, I was aware that I could have had difficulties conceiving. I knew this. However, I kind of had this expectation or this kind of hope that everything would be fine, that actually I would be one of the odd ones that will be able to get pregnant right away without much trouble. And I think a lot of people, you know, rightly so, think that and hope for that. And I think it's important to be positive and to approach this exciting prospect of conception that way. However, I was then faced with a reality that was very different, and being a person that relies so much on control, which is something I'm working on, feeling not in tune with my body, feeling confused about what was happening to me and why things were not working. I felt like I was fighting almost against myself. I was very disappointed, and that really hit me hard. I kept a very close, watchful eye over, as I told you at the beginning, over the app and over the tests, and I really started obsessing over them, especially when things were not working. I was really trying to crack the code and understand what I could tweak, what I could do differently to make things as successful and to have a positive outcome. But I realized that the more I was stressing out about it, the less chances actually I was giving myself to have a chance at succeeding at it. Stress is a massive factor in conception. It felt like I was a dog biting my own tail, going in circles and spinning out of control. Also, bear in mind that timed intercourse is anything but romantic. There's no such thing as spontaneity in that picture. And it can be really taxing on a relationship, because when the last thing you want is to take your clothes off and get in the bed sheets, but that's what the app is telling you to do. That's what the ovulation test is telling you to do. It's really, really tough. I definitely saw that put a big strain on my relationship with Ruben, and that pressure was just really not healthy. So yeah, it was just really, really hard in that first phase where we tried to do it by ourselves. I guess the moment we reached out to the clinic, and we again were so privileged for being able to do so. Those are extremely expensive procedures, and I know that a lot of people just cannot afford it or don't have the luxury to have insurance coverage for it. So I'm very, very thankful that we were able to do this and to tackle it relatively quickly. So when we reached out to the clinic, I could really see the light at the end of the tunnel. And with the help of a medical team, I could see how we could take control over the situation again. I just felt like by that point, I didn't know what was going on anymore. I kind of lost faith and trust in myself. I blamed myself quite a lot, and it wasn't a great place to be. So being able to work with a professional team on this was really, really helpful mentally. And I guess when they talk you through the percentages and the chances of having twins or multiple pregnancies, we were confronted at the time when both follicles were competing and would have potentially been viable for pregnancy. We were confronted with that choice of, do we want to proceed or not? And I remember really, really struggling during those couple of days when I had to make a decision, and I just couldn't figure out really what I wanted and what would have been best for myself, for Ruben, for our family. We ended up deciding to go ahead with it and, you know, risk it. That was also quite difficult. And actually when I saw that positive pregnancy test at the end of it, I just couldn't believe it. I was just so used to negative results, to being disappointed. I just wasn't expecting for it to have worked. I was so surprised, and I feel very lucky that it had worked. But you see, even if we've been working on this for so long and desiring this for such a long time, seeing that positive test, I just felt scared. That was my first reaction. I think I judged myself a little bit for how I reacted, and I know that there is this like stereotype for how you should react when you find out you're having a baby, you know, crying and you know, laughing hysterically. I didn't have any of that. It's actually quite bad that, you know, there is this kind of expectation that you should react a certain way. And so the fact that my reaction was very different was quite confusing, but I tried to give myself grace and understand that, you know, emotions are all valid and that I would just need time to process it, because it's a big piece of news. It's something that is going to shake up your life completely, and I think the reality of it kind of hit me in the face when I saw that positive result. So anyway, it's been several weeks now, and my bump is happy and healthy, my baby is happy and healthy, and I'm very excited to step into motherhood when the time comes. I'm very excited for it, and I'm very grateful that this process did work. And as I said to you at the very beginning, I really hope that sharing this story might be of help to any of you out there that might be going through this, that you have benefited from hearing about my experience. And of course, if you have any questions at all, if you want to hear more about anything that I just touched on, please let me know. I would love to answer your questions and get a little bit deeper into it if needed be. But thank you so much for watching today. I'm so grateful for you tuning in. It's really appreciated. I love you all. See you next time. Bye.